Welcome to the Best in News podcast. Stay tuned to updates on Biden's infrastructure plan, his approval rating, Oscar recipient Tyler Perry, alleged assault by Tennessee CEO, Star Trek actor LeVar Burton, Supreme Court allowing for police officers to be sued, and conservative pastor concern for Black Lives Matter, and much more. All coming up soon. All right, the Oscars audience stops clapping. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the Best in News podcast. The Oscars audience. Let's first of all, first to do the first thing on the to-do list. The Oscars audience stops clapping after filmmaker Tyler Perry, a Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award recipient, urged Americans not to hate police officers during his speech. Let's take a look.
Thank you. Thank you. That's incredibly kind. Thank you so much. They only gave me a few minutes, so I want to say a very special thanks to Ms. Viola Davis, who is nominated tonight and doing this. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. To the Board of Governors, especially to Whoopi Goldberg, Ava. You know, when I set out to help someone, it is my intention to do just that. I'm not trying to do anything other than meet somebody at their humanity. Like, case in point, this one time, I remember maybe it was about 17 years ago, I rented this building and we were using it for production. And I was walking to my car one day and I see this woman coming up out of the corner of my eye and I say, she's homeless, let me give her some money. Judgment. I wish I had time to talk about judgment. Anyway, I reach in my pocket and I'm about to give her the money. She says, excuse me, sir, do you have any shoes? It stopped me cold because I remember being homeless and having one pair of shoes and they were bent over at the heel. So I was like, yeah. So I took her into the studio. She was hesitant to go in, but we went in. We go to wardrobe and there are all these boxes and everything around the walls and fabrics and racks of clothes. So we ended up having to stand in the middle of the floor. So as we're standing there, wardrobe, we find some shoes, we help her put them on. I stand up. I'm waiting for her to look up. And all this time she's looking down. She finally looks up. She's got tears in her eyes. She said, thank you, Jesus. My feet are off the ground. In that moment, I recall her saying to me, I thought you would hate me for asking. I'm like, how can I hate you when I used to be you? How can I hate you when I had a mother who grew up in a Jim Crow South in Louisiana, rural Louisiana, right across the border from Mississippi, who at 9 or 10 years old was grieving the death of Emmett Till. As she got a little bit older, she was grieving the death of the civil rights boys and the little girls who were in the bombing in Alabama. She grieved all these years. And I remember being a little boy and coming home, and she was at home, like, what are you doing at home? You're supposed to be at work. She was in tears that day. She said there was a bomb threat, and she couldn't believe that someone wanted to blow up this place where she worked, where she took care of all these toddlers. It was the Jewish Community Center. My mother taught me to refuse hate. She taught me to refuse blanket judgment. And in this time, and with all of the internet and social media and algorithms and everything that wants us to think a certain way, the 24-hour news cycle, it is my hope that all of us would teach our kids, and not only to remember, just refuse hate. Don't hate anybody. I refuse to hate someone because they are Mexican or because they are black or white or LBGTQ. I refuse to hate someone because they are a police officer. I refuse to hate someone because they are Asian. I would hope that we would refuse hate. And I want to take this Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award and dedicate it to anyone who wants to stand in the middle No matter what's around the walls, stand in the middle, because that's where healing happens. That's where conversation happens. That's where change happens. It happens in the middle. So anyone who wants to meet me in the middle, to refuse hate, to refuse blanket judgment, and to help lift someone's feet off the ground, this one is for you too. God bless you, and thank you, Academy. I appreciate it.
Now, one person, Kathleen Newman Breman, criticized Perry's speech for talking about police officers between Americans who had faced discrimination. She also claims that no one hates the police because of undue prejudice. It's because they engage in state-sanctioned violence against all of the groups. Tyler Perry said, "We shouldn't hate." It's because they engage in state-sanctioned violence against all of the groups. Tyler Perry said, "We shouldn't hate." Let me show you the tweet. All right. Now, Hugh Jackman had a different story to tell.
Okay, I recommend watching the video clip from the Oscars last night of Tyler Perry receiving the Jean Hirschfeld Humanitarian Award. First of all, the MPTF, who also received the award, are incredible, and I was so happy for them. And there were so many great moments of the Oscars last night. Chloe, the first woman of color, winning. There was just so many, but that one in particular really touched me, because when Tyler speaks of stepping into the middle, I was like literally yelling at the TV, like, "I'll meet you in the middle, Tyler." And I'm telling you now on social, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your leadership. I'm literally, hopefully, going to meet you in the middle. Let's break bread, which I will bake. And let's talk about how we can get stuff done, because, dude, it's astonishing what you're doing, and you're an inspiration. Okay.
Now, Rose McGowan was on Fox News Sunday and blames Democrat leaders for not making promises that they didn't keep. She refused to vote for Democrats any longer, and she also blames Clinton. Let me show you.
The Democrats are really pretty much almost against all the same things. They're against changing the world for the better, and they're for keeping a system in place that is for so few people and benefits so few, but they masquerade as the helpers. We would do this, the world would be perfect if only those Republicans would get out of the way. Well, okay, you've got control, so now what? What are you going to do to make the world better? I'm embracing in my life right now really just almost healing in a way, not just for me, but for so many others. You know, during the Me Too media period, it was just triggers for so many women and men alike, you know, everybody really. And it was a painful period for very many people, as it was for me,
Sure.
You know, and my persecution, and awakening from being a Democrat was so much about what I do and what I say now, and so much about realizing how hardcore of a cult it is.
You know,
and
what's
how
interesting
much
is the ability
it does to women and the people it says it's going to help. But then why haven't they achieved anything?
What would you say to every woman watching?
I would say to every woman and man, or anybody watching, that freedom does come at a price. And your personal freedom comes at the price of you realizing how you're being controlled and where it's coming from and separate. I would make a list, your belief system, and figure out what your belief system, what part of it is organic to you and what part has been implanted either by Hollywood or the media or your leaders.
Great idea.
What part of it is truly yours? What's organic to you? And see what's the polyester and pull it out of your fabric. We have to examine what we believe and why. I'm going to get a lot of hate for being on Fox News. That's just a fact. I've gotten people, on the left yelling at me like, you go up against Biden, you go up against the Clintons, you go up. I'm like, yes, but all of these people had, the Clintons have had a direct hand in helping one of my perpetrators, who was one of the most powerful Democratic donors there was, and also their entree into the Hollywood world. And I've been persecuted by them, and I find that I had to even look through what had been implanted in me. So I would say look at your own belief systems and get free. You can still believe in whatever party you want to believe in, but not to the limit where it makes it so you cannot have a human conversation with every other person.
And it doesn't mean
Now, Star Trek actor LeVar Burton told Meghan McCain on The View that she calls cancel culture, instead of calling, he calls cancel culture consequence culture. Now, in a lot of news about Dr. Seuss books being pulled from bookstore shelves, cancel culture is misnamed. Let me show you.
I think we need to put things in perspective. In terms of cancel culture, I think it's misnamed. That's a misnomer. I think we have a consequence culture, and that consequences are finally encompassing everybody in the society, whereas they haven't been ever in this country. So I think that there are good signs that are happening in the culture right now, and I think it has everything to do with a new awareness on people who were simply unaware of the real nature of life in this country for people who have been othered since this nation began.
On another note, Pastor E.W. Jackson says Black Lives Matter is worse than COVID. COVID-19 has claimed more than 560,000 American lives, but conservative Pastor E.W. Jackson believes Black Lives Matter will have more detrimental lasting effects on America than the pandemic. Jackson said on Awakening on the radio show, the cultural virus in the United States may be worse than the medical one that the pandemic posed. He pushed back against the criticism of law enforcement, arguing that it would motivate officers to abandon their career choice at the Black Lives Matter co-founders' belief in Marxism, a philosophy also associated with communism and socialism. COVID is a medical problem and a disease problem that is going to run its course, Jackson said. I think Black Lives Matter could so infect the culture of our country, so divide us racially, that it would take a generation to undo the damage they are doing. Jackson, who is black, criticized Black Lives Matter for having different reactions to shootings if involved a police officer, accused the organization of not really caring about the people they advocate for and being out of sync with the Word of God. The pastor, who was the Republican candidate for Virginia's lieutenant governor, also took issue with Patrisse Cullors, a co-founder of BLM, and says she was working to undermine America. In December, Cullors said in a YouTube video that she learned about Marxism early on her organizing career. A believer in Marxism, she said she was taught about systems that were criticizing capitalism and encouraged people to be open to the idea. Cullors noted that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was referred to as a communist while he was alive, but now, decades later, people only discuss the work he did to advance equality. The core of the movement, she said, was the liberation of every human being, and the way to get there, according to Kohlers, is not the current structure that is in place. I'm working on making sure people don't suffer. I'm working to make sure people don't go hungry, Kohlers said in a YouTube video. I do believe that we can get to a place where there's a socio-economic system that doesn't oppress certain groups of people and only uplifts a few. Pointing Kohlers' comment in June that she was a trained Marxist, Jackson questioned who funded the training and criticized a proposal to abolish the criminal justice system. Kohlers praised the jury for finding former Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin guilty of murdering George Floyd, but disagreed it signaled the system worked. Instead, she said in the video posted on Instagram, it showed it was broken and that there was a need to fight more to move America to a place where there are no jails or prisons or surveillance. Jackson called it a belief straight from the Marxist playbook and said on Monday the United States should start considering who is Marxist or communist a threat to our national security. He said holding those beliefs calls into question whether they have greater loyalty to China than to the United States. Newsweek reached out to the Black Lives Matter for comment, but did not receive response time for publication. Now, also, the Supreme Court just passed an opinion allowing for police officers, allowing civilians to have the ability to sue police officers. The U.S. Supreme Court expanded the ability of people to sue police for excessive force, ruling in favor of a New Mexico woman who filed a civil rights lawsuit after being shot by officers she had mistaken for carjackers. The 5-3 decision allowing the woman, Roxanne Torres, to pursue a lawsuit accusing New Mexico State Police officers Richard Williamson and Janice Madrid of violating the U.S. Constitution's Fourth Amendment ban on illegal searches and seizures, even though she had not been immediately detained or seized in the incident. The court determined that in order to sue for excessive force under the Fourth Amendment, it is not necessary for a plaintiff to have been physically seized by law enforcement. We hold that the application of physical force to the body of a person with intent to restrain and seizure if the person does not submit and is not subdued, Conservative Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the ruling. Roberts was joined in the decision by the court's 3 liberals and one of his fellow conservatives, Justice Brett Kavanaugh. 3 other conservative justices dissented. The newest Justice Conservative, Amy Coney Barrett, did not participate because she had not yet joined the court when the case was argued in October. In a dissenting opinion, Conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch said a seizure under the Fourth Amendment has been defined as taking possession of someone or something. He criticized the court's contrary conclusion. The view was mistaken as it is novel, Gorsuch wrote. The case will not return to the lower courts. Whether officers could seek to have the lawsuit dismissed on the other grounds, including the legal doctrine called qualified immunity that protects police and other types of government officials from civil litigation in certain circumstances. In the 2014 incident, 4 officers arrived in an apartment complex in Albuquerque and approached Torres, who was sitting in a car. Torres said she fled when she saw people with guns approaching, thinking she was going to be carjacked. Madrid and Williamson fired 13 shots between them, hitting her twice in the back as she drove away in her car. Torres continued driving, but she was arrested the next day after being treated in the hospital for her wounds. She was convicted of 3 criminal offenses, including fleeing from a law enforcement officer. After Torres sued the federal court in New Mexico in 2016, the judge dismissed the case, saying there could be no excessive force claim because a seizure had not occurred. The Denver-based 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reached the same conclusion in 2019, prompting Torres to appeal to the Supreme Court. There is heightened public scrutiny of public conduct in the wake of protests in many cities last year against racism and police brutality, and rulings by the Supreme Court in other cases of police powers are due by the end of June. Also, a Tennessee CEO allegedly assaults a individual who was going to prom. An individual who was going to prom. So, Tennessee is gaining widespread support and is now catching eye of the celebrities like Kathy Griffin and Billy Porter. A Tennessee-based CEO had lost his job after a video went viral that showed a teen wearing a dress to his prom. In a TikTok video that has now gone viral, former Visuwell CEO Sam Johnson is being taunting Franklin High School senior Dalton Stevens for what he wore to his school dance. He looked like an idiot, Johnny says to Stevens. Stevens and his boyfriend insult Johnson as the former CEO continues to heckle the high school senior. Visuwell released a statement on Monday on Twitter saying it fired Johnson after looking into the incident. The company condemned its remarks. We unequivocally condemn the behavior exhibited by Sam Johnson. A recent video widely circulated on social media, Visuwell said in its statement. After investigating the matter and speaking to individuals involved, the Visuwell Board of Directors has chosen to terminate Mr. Johnson from his position on CEO effective immediately. Jerry Andrade, our president and COO, will lead the company through this important time. Visuwell's culture emphasizes respect, kindness, and compassion, especially for those from traditionally marginalized communities. And we maintain a zero-tolerance policy for intolerance of any kind, the company added. And let me show you what I'm talking about.
Has now removed the video of my boyfriend being harassed on our prom night 2 times for harassment and bullying, but I'm still going to give you guys a story time, and I'm going to have my friend Bree post the main video on her TikTok account, which I'll comment below if you guys want to go and watch it. This is a long story, probably going to have to make multiple parts, but I'm in college, my boyfriend's a senior in high school, and he decided that he wanted to wear a dress for his senior prom to kind of break the stigma around men wearing dresses. He looked gorgeous, everybody loved it, nobody had a problem with it, right? We went to this hotel close to where we lived, and we got a lot of good photos. We were there for about an hour, and right as we were about to leave, we were standing outside in this little middle area with a bunch of buildings surrounding us. This man comes up, stands about an inch behind my boyfriend, and he's like, "What are you wearing?" And he's like, "A dress. Why?" And he's like, "Well, why are you wearing that? You shouldn't be wearing that." He's like, "Because I can and I want to, and I really don't give a what you think." So this man starts going on and on, throwing insults at him. You look disgusting. You look ridiculous. You look like an idiot. Men shouldn't be wearing this. All of this homophobic banter. So I grabbed my phone to start to record because I knew I wanted to record the from the get-go. So I grab my phone, start to record. He slaps my phone out of my hand. It goes flying over on the concrete. Part 2 coming right now. Part 2, it was getting hot in my car, so I decided to come inside. So he hits my phone out of my hand. It goes flying on the concrete. I go to grab it to start recording him again, and he tries to swing at me again, which you can see in the original video when the camera goes out for a second. You can see him swinging. He tries to hit my phone out of my hand again, but he misses, and he hits my boyfriend in the back. So that's when all of the moms that were there, they're getting really involved out. They're like, you need to calm down. Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. You were out of your mind. And at this point, the hotel staff had gotten word from inside about what was going on. So 2 other ladies come out, and they're like, okay, guys, what's going on out here? He pretends like he has absolutely no clue what's going on. He's standing there. He's like, I've just been standing here the whole time. I don't know what's going on. I didn't try to talk to them. I didn't hit him. I didn't try to smack his phone out of his hand. I'm like, dude, I have a minute-long video of you harassing us. You can't just blatantly deny it like that. The staff was really great about everything. They sent him back to the bar because he was pretty obviously drunk, just because they were calling the police and they didn't want him to freak out any more than he already was. And as we were leaving, they told us that they were kicking him out and calling the police, so...
I chose what I want to wear, so you off. Okay? Okay.
Is that right?
Think he looks gross? Looks disgusting? Yeah?
Yeah.
You look like
I look like what? Off!
What,
you look like an idiot.
Get the away from me!
what does he look like?
Please stop.
Do not leave
No,
me.
sir. No, sir. I can towards you all I
Get
want.
the away!
Keep talking.
Please, please.
Say
Look like a
something to me.
moron.
Get away!
Please. Listen,
Stop, stop. Please.
it's just promise.
This is a special night.
It's kids. It's a bunch of kids. Come on, dude.
Just don't let one thing bother you. Just please. Just stop.
I'm sorry, I'm gorgeous.
Stop.
Are you?
Yes.
Yep.
Just gorgeous.
Stop.
Great.
Are you okay?
Great.
Okay, let's go. Just go and have fun. Let's
He's
go.
the one that's following us. We moved. Like, we moved from over there to over here.
Let's go.
Seriously, come on, dude. We don't want any problems tonight.
Is it really worth it?
And also, now, updates on Biden's infrastructure plan. Now, President Biden is pitching his $2.7 trillion plus infrastructure plan, chock full of items unrelated to traditional transportation infrastructure. It's a key to restore the economy, putting Americans back to work. It's called the American Jobs Plan, and this is the moment. And this is what Biden says, this is the moment to reimagine and build a new economy, and introducing his plan. The American Jobs Plan is an investment in America that will create millions of good jobs, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and position the United States to outcompete China. Above all, infrastructure is about meeting the needs of the nation and putting Americans to work to get the job done. Now, there are people who are against this plan, and I'm going to show reports. I'm going to explain talk about some reports on people who disagree about the infrastructure plan. New analysis supports co-rolling Biden plan. Analysts at the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania weighed the potential benefits the proposed spending would have against the costs incurred by higher government debt and higher business tax rates. They find that while sending piles of cash flying out the door might seem stimulative at first, the long-term effects would all be net negative. By 2031, Wharton projects that the size of the economy's total output will have shrunk by 0.9% as a result of Jobs' plan. The analysts also predict a 3% decrease in the capital stock a measure of the nation's productive resources such as machinery, buildings, etc. Why will the massive government spending reduce the capital shock? Because the proposal is financed by raising corporate taxes, which directly reduces private sector investment, and because it involves incurring massive amounts of government debt, which crowds around private sector investment. Why the jobs plan is bad news for workers. Here's where things get ugly for workers under the jobs plan. Reduced capital, aka productive tools, means lower work productivity. Investments in improved machinery, for example, allow assembly line workers to produce more in output per hour worked. And productivity is inextricably linked to workers' wages. More investment of capital means to give the laborer more efficient tools. Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises loosely explained, with the aid of better tools and machines, the quantity of the products increases, their quality improves. As the employer consequently will be in a position to obtain from the consumers more for what the employee has produced in 1 hour of work. He is able, and by the competition of other employers, forced to pay a higher price for the man's work. Of course, if capital and hence productivity is decreased, the opposite effect occurs and workers earn less over time. So it's not surprising that Wharton concluded the massive multi-trillion jobs plan will, by 2031, actually lead to 0.7% decrease in average hourly wages. The analysts also note that there will be almost no increase in analysts also note that there will be almost no increase in employment as measured by total hours worked. Long-term harms, not benefits. Similar negative effects play out over an even longer time frame. Wharton projects with negative results from the jobs plan in 2040 and 2050. Table 4, showing in 2031 GDP at negative 0.9, capital stock negative 3.0, average hourly wage negative 0.7, hours worked negative 0.1, and government debt is 1.7. 2040 GDP is at negative 0.8, capital stock negative 3.1, average hourly wage negative 0.9, hours worked 0.1, government debt is negative 3.4. In 2050, negative 0.8, capital stock negative 3, our average hourly wage negative 0.8, hours worked 0, government debt negative 6.4. The takeaway: rhetoric and promise don't guarantee results. President Biden's sweeping infrastructure proposal is just the latest example in the long history of ambitious political rhetoric, masking mediocre results. Politicians often point to the proposed benefits of their policies, often tangible and easy to see, make their case for big government spending based on the benefits alone. But while rhetoric can be rosy, real life involves trade-offs, the weighing of benefits and costs, and when we do this honestly for Biden's infrastructure proposal, the results are grim indeed. Now, as for Biden's approval rating, or at least this is according to Fox News, and while approaching the 100-day milestone. Now, Biden gets lower marks than Bush and Obama, but stands ahead of Trump at the same point. Now, it shows Bush with 63%, Obama at 62%, Biden at 54%, Trump is at the bottom at 45%. Now, there's an 81-point gap of approval of President Biden between Democrats 95% and Republicans 14%. Now, that's even a bit wider than the 76-point partisan gap for former President Trump in April 2017. In addition, concern about coronavirus stands at a record low, and the highest percentage ever say the virus is at least somewhat under control. 81% feel feel it is under control, an increase of 34 points since December. Is coronavirus under control in the U.S.? 9% say for completely now, as of December, 8%. Most people now is at 20% who think coronavirus is under control in the U.S. And as of December, 10%. And they only think, 52% only think somewhat coronavirus is under control. That's the best news in the poll for Biden. By a 31-point margin, voters say border security is worse than it was 2 years ago. 56% majority thinks Biden winning the election is completely or mostly behind the increase of migrants at the U.S. southern border, and 67% are extremely or very concerned about illegal immigration. Views on the economy are more than 2 to 1 negative, 29% rate it as an excellent, good, and 69% say only fair and poor. That's little change since the end of Trump's term, when it was 33 to 66%. However, in January 2020, before the pandemic, 55% rated economic conditions positively, including a record 20% saying excellent. And the way people see how the economy is being now, shown with that graph, the consistency between the current ratings and those in December disguises major shifts among partisans as they adjusted the change in the occupant at the White House. Today, 46% of Democrats rate the economy positively, up to 25 points since December. And just 17% of Republicans rate it positively now, down 34 points. The National Poll released Sunday also shows that while 53% of voters are unhappy with how things are going in the country, 45% are satisfied, the highest since January 2018. Since last summer, the last time Fox asked the question, satisfaction among Republicans had turned to dissatisfaction and vice versa among Democrats. Dissatisfaction held steady among a majority of independents. Biden's job approval ratings are below 50% on every top issue, with one exception. 58% approve on the coronavirus, 34% disapprove. His ratings are lower, but still net positive on health care, 48% approve, 37% disapprove. The economy, 48% to approve on guns, 36 to 49, border security, 35 to 51, and immigration, 34 to 52. Among Hispanics, a group whose 2020 election support for Biden lagged expectations, his 72% approval overall drops to 54% for his handling of immigration and 44% for border security. About both Democrats and Republicans expressed high levels of concern. At least 60% extremely or very concerned about the economy, gun laws, health care, and infrastructure. Beyond those issues, strong partisan differences emerge. The top three worries among Democrats are climate change, racism, and health care. For Republicans, it's illegal immigration, the economy, and voter fraud. Voter fraud comes in last for Democrats, while climate change is the lowest concern for Republicans. In general, voters say they want lower taxes and less government. By 56 to 36% margin, now they prefer paying lower taxes and having a smaller government that provides few services to higher taxes to support larger government, more services. Yet nearly half favor Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan, 49 to 41%, and majorities favor paying for that plan by increasing taxes, either on businesses and corporations, 56 to 39%, or families earning over $400,000 a year, 63 to 33%. Now, preference for government. Lowering taxes, smaller government, about 56%. Those who want higher taxes and larger government is at least 36%. And this was as of April 18 to 21, April 18 to through 21st, 2021. For reference, a voter concerned about the nation's infrastructure, 68% is touch higher than the concern about the amount they pay in taxes, 63%. A majority of 54% is against increasing the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. 35% in favor. And this is a graph showing you right now 35% favor increasing the Supreme Court justices. 54% oppose that idea. Regardless of how they vote in the election, after 3/4 of the voters, 78% want Biden to succeed, including 60% Republicans. That's about the same as the 80% overall and 63% of Democrats who felt that way about Trump in his first year. Now, do they want President Biden to succeed? Biden, as of April 21st, 78% say yes, 50% say no, and it shows statistics of all the previous presidents. More voters credit Biden with bipartisanship than GOP lawmakers. 45% think the president has truly made an effort to work with Republicans in Washington, while 30% say Republicans in D.C. have reciprocated. That difference is largely due to the fact that 79% of Democrats feel Biden has tried to work across the aisle. Only 43% of Republicans feel GOP are doing the same. Now, has Biden, GOP, made effort to work with each other's side in the D.C.? Well, did President Biden toward GOP, 45% say yes, 42% say no. Now, going from GOP toward President Biden, 30% say yes, 53% say no. Now, both Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris go on a positive favor ratings. Biden receives a net plus 10, which is a 54% favorable versus 44% unfavorable. For Harris, it's a slim plus 3, which is 49 to 46. Most want to hear from them more often. Now, a lot of them want to hear from them more often. 77% of voters think it's important for Biden and Harris to hold regular press conferences. That includes 87% of Democrats, 74% of Republicans, and 62% of independents. Now, conducted April 18 to 21st, 2021, under the joint direction of Beacon Research and Shaw and Company, this Fox News includes interviews with 1,002 randomly chosen registered voters nationwide who spoke with live interviews of both landline and cell phones. Total sample has a margin of sampling error of plus and minus 3 percentage points. Now, as for Governor Edwards from Louisiana lifts some of the mask mandates for local governments and for small and local businesses.
With basically flat or small increases with the very low and stable baselines, I've decided that we are going to take some steps in further reducing restrictions and mandatory mitigation measures. Another positive trend is the very steep decline in COVID deaths of people 75 and older, our most vaccinated group. And it's now been more than a month since Louisiana opened up vaccine eligibility to everyone 16 and older, regardless of occupation, regardless of any underlying health condition. We were one of the first states to do that. Today, I can report 26% of Louisianans are fully vaccinated, and that includes more than 67% of those who are 65 and older.
Also, on another note, also the judicial hearing in it with a big debate. Let me show you that video.
Right. This is an amendment which is completely irrelevant. But of course, our friends on the other side all know that this is an opportunity or an excuse for them to make a bunch of speeches about issues that have nothing to do with this bill. We have 1 and 5 minutes and even 5 and 10-minute opportunities to do that. But it is frankly disrespectful to the members of this committee that you are using a markup on a serious piece of legislation that will really help people so you can pontificate about some of our colleagues. Let's be very clear. I asked the gentleman to yield. I asked the gentleman to yield. I asked the gentleman to yield for a question.
The gentleman has the time.
I asked the gentleman if he would
Not
yield
to
for a
impugn
question.
the integrity of other members. He doesn't have the time.
I asked the gentleman if he would yield to a question. The question would be, can you tell me if there is a single state in America that is defunding, disbanding, or disestablishing a law enforcement agency of that state? The reason I wanted to ask him that question is because the answer is no. It doesn't happen. And by the way, Democrats are not proposing that. In fact, we have, as Democrats, funded to the police to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in our relief package. And every single one of my Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted against it. So there's one party that's defunded the police, or at least tried to by voting against funding for the police. That are my friends on the other side of the aisle. The Democrats, in fact, have provided substantial resources to the police in a series of pieces of legislation and funding on the floor of this House. And so this is, again, an opportunity, sadly, of my Republican colleagues to raise an issue which they claim Democrats are arguing for, which is not true. But they're using this markup as an opportunity to promote this big lie. The Democrats are funding the police.
That is a violation of the rules. You just lectured on the violation of the rules, and that member is specifically violating the rules and your instruction. Are we going to have rules or not?
It is not a violation of the rule. The gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, then
Chairman.
you should withdraw your
Thank
instructions
you, Mr.
for
Chairman.
Mr. Tiffany.
With all due respect, Mr. Goldman, I control the time. And so let's return back to this piece of legislation. I regret that a very important bill that will have a really significant impact on families that we all represent all across this country is being at least temporarily distracted from by this amendment. It's an amendment which is wholly irrelevant. The CARES Act, I'll just remind folks, included $1.25 billion in grant funding for local police for states. Every single one of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted against that funding. So how dare the claim be made in this committee or any place that anyone's trying to defund the police? And again, this amendment says a state that is doing it. There is no state in America where this is happening. This is a make-believe argument to give folks an opportunity to promote this claim, which we know is untrue. It's infuriating. I urge everyone to reject this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does Mr. Jordan seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
The Democrats have a bill that says to political jurisdictions, if you change your law, if you do it the way we want, you will give you money. And our colleague from North Carolina comes with an amendment and says, if you engage in certain behavior, we're not going to give you that money. It is entirely relevant. The chairman has twice now used the term irrelevant. This is as relevant as it gets. Last week, the Democrats started off the week with one of our colleagues from Detroit saying no more policing. We just heard the gentleman from Rhode Island say the Democrats haven't talked about defunding the police.
No, that's not what I said.
One of their members said last
week,
we haven't talked about more policing. No more policing. And let me just, the Democrat-run cities, New York City cut $1 billion from its police department's budget and saw a 97% increase in shootings. Los Angeles cut $170 million from its budget, saw an 11.6% increase in homicides. Austin, Texas, $150 million cut, 50% spike in homicides. Portland, Oregon, a $12 million cut, eliminated 3 police units. Shootings went up 173%, murders up 25%. I would bet the people, the residents of those communities think this amendment is relevant, for goodness sake. Democrats started the week last week saying, get rid of police. They ended the week with one of our colleagues, Democrat colleagues, being admonished by a judge for the ridiculous things that they said. and somehow the gentleman from North Carolina's amendment's not relevant? Are you kidding me? This is as relevant as it gets, as timely as it gets, and I hope we could actually agree on something and adopt the gentleman's amendment. With that, I yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman yields back. For what purposes the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it quite clear that this amendment is completely irrelevant. I served as a law enforcement officer for 27 years. It is a tough job, and good police officers deserve your support. You know, it's interesting to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle support the police when it is politically convenient to do so. Law enforcement officers risk their lives every day. They deserve better, and the American people deserve. I have the floor, Mr. Jordan.
Lady has
What,
the floor.
did I strike a nerve? Law enforcement officers deserve better than to be utilized as pawns. And you and your colleagues are ashamed of yourself.
The gentlelady will suspend and the clock will be stopped. I want to admonish members. They must not interrupt someone who has the time.
Mr. Chairman, can I
You
ask a
simply
question?
can't shout out. If you think that someone is saying
I agree.
If you,
Mr. Jordan, you don't know what in the heck you're talking about. You know nothing about what law enforcement
I know about my motive.
And you're using them as pawns because it serves your ridiculous political purpose.
Val, everyone must suspend. I am making the point. No one may shout out when someone else has the time. Not Mr. Gomert.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Not Mr. Jordan. Nobody.
Not Mr. Cicilline.
Not Ms.
Demings.
He didn't do that. But nobody.
Not Mr. Jordan.
Not Ms.
Nobody.
Cicilline. Okay, no, but I agree with that. But
And how do we?
Everybody.
I have a question.
I will simply. There is no question. Nobody may shout out.
When you give a speech, Mr. Chairman, about motives and questioning motives, and then our motives are questioned, how do we address that?
The rules allow a request words
I have
point of
watched
inquiry.
them live and die, and you know nothing about that. And to utilize them as political
Mr. Chairman,
pawns,
I have a point of inquiry.
off.
People
Chairman,
will
I have a
address
point of
comments
inquiry.
to the chair.
Mr. Chairman.
The rules do not permit shouting out when someone else has the time. The only thing you may do when someone else has the time is you may raise a point of order if you think it proper, and the chair will then rule on the
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
So you gave us a lecture on people questioning our motives. When someone questions our motives, how do we address it when they're in the act of questioning our motives?
That is not a point of order.
Yes, it is.
That is not a point of
Mr.
order.
Chairman, may I continue, please?
That is not a point of order. Ms. Demings has the time, and the clock will resume. Gentlelady's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to hear that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are on the side of law enforcement now. Because I don't know where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been over the last 4 years, including on January 6th, when police officers who protect us every day were fighting for their lives because of the big lie that was told, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were silent. As one person after another person took the microphone and said, go down there and engage in combat, fight like hell. They used the bicycle racks as deadly missiles against the law enforcement officers that you all say you care about so much. And thank you, Mr. Cicilline, because you're absolutely right. The only person who voted to support local governments and pass legislation to support local governments that includes law enforcement were the Democratic members on this side of the aisle. But now today, you support law enforcement. Well, I'm delighted to know that. But don't support them when it's politically convenient for you to do so. Support them when they're under attack by people fighting them and spraying them and knocking them to the ground and beating them with poles, with carrying the American flags and pipes.
Unbelievable.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Appreciate the chairman. I would note that the gentlelady references January 6th. Speaking for myself and at least a few others in this room on this committee, I was one of those members that voted not to object, that took the floor acknowledging some of the issues that occurred on January 6th. And everybody in this room, regardless of how they voted on January 6th, understands exactly what Capitol Police did in standing up and defending this institution. And in fact, just today, the Republican Conference presented certificates and awards and commendations to recognize law enforcement that stood on the floor of the Capitol to defend this body. I did not serve in law enforcement, but I was the first Assistant Attorney General of Texas and had about 170 law enforcement reporting to him. I was a former federal prosecutor and worked with law enforcement. My grandfather was the chief of police of a small Texas town. My great-great-grandfather was a Texas Ranger in Texas. I come from a family that is heavily devoted to law enforcement and the rule of law. I understand, and I've heard the arguments that FOP supports this legislation. That's fine. The reason that we're rising and the reason that the gentleman from North Carolina's amendment matters is because what we're talking about nationwide, in response, by the way, to that nobody's cutting anything, that's just not true, is that we are seeing dramatic cuts and attacks on law enforcement. It's happening in real time. Austin, Texas, run by Democrats, slashed the police department, and they are absolutely demoralized. They are crushed. Go talk to the law enforcement. They are fleeing the city. And now the city is overrun by homeless encampments, and it is dangerous, and people don't go downtown, our beautiful city in Austin, Texas, because of a radical leftist city council. And that radical leftist city council takes funding from this body. All of the funding everybody talked about, ooh, you voted against all of that great local government funding. That because dollars. We're talking about grants with money we don't even have. We're talking about, and we're arguing about grant money we literally don't have, while we mortgage our children's future and we pretend we're not doing it. $30 trillion of debt. $6 trillion in a year. It cost us $4 trillion in today's dollars to win World War II from beginning to end. And this Democratic Congress blew through $6 trillion in a year doing nothing. Nothing to make this country better or stronger. It is an absolute abomination. And then to listen to members of this body say, and I quote, "I hope we get a verdict that says guilty, guilty, guilty. And if we don't, we cannot go away. We've got to stay on the street. We get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure they know that we mean business." How irresponsible can a member of Congress be than to say that and then to have the judge in the case that the whole nation is watching say that that might throw the case out on appeal? That is what we're talking about. We are talking about the quote by another member of this body. It wasn't an accident. Policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. I am done with those who condone government-funded murder. Government-funded murder, no more policing. Quote, no more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It can't be reformed. To say this is irrelevant, it is the central issue of our day right now to make sure this country is safe. And when we're talking about federal grant money being doled out, and by the way, what does the bill start with? Quote, to provide grants to states that do not suspend, revoke, or refuse. That's what we do. We throw out money, and then we demand action. And all my friend from North Carolina is doing is saying, don't defund the cops. I yield to the ranking member.
I think the gentleman...
So that was the markup of 1843. That was the markup of H.